This meeting is being recorded.
All right, Mayor Bennett, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Erin. I'd like to call this meeting to order of the Chicago Metropolitan Agency for Planning, and press star six on your phones if you're calling in to mute and unmute yourself. And I will read this for the last time. As permitted by the governor's disaster declaration dated Friday, April 28th, the determination was made that an in-person meeting is not practical or prudent to this board. To ensure a transparent and open meeting as possible, the meeting materials were posted approximately 1 week in advance, and a recording of this meeting will be provided and linked to our website, and all votes will be taken by roll call. Erin, read the roll.
Thank you. Mayor Bennett,
Present.
Frank Beal, President Brawley,
Here.
Mayor Darch,
Here.
Paul Goodrich,
Here.
Jim Healy, Nina Idamudia,
Here.
Mayor Noak,
Here.
President Reinbold,
Here.
Mayor Rodering, Stefan Schaefer,
Here.
Carolyn Schofield,
Here.
Ann Sheehan,
Here.
Matt Walsh,
Present.
Diane Williams,
Present.
Leanne Redden, and Dr. Koros Mohammadian.
Present.
Okay, there is a quorum, and the first item on the agenda would be the approval of the minutes. I'll entertain a motion to approve those minutes.
And actually, any agenda changes or announcements first? I have none on my end. Nope, none on my end. Okay, yep.
All right.
Approval of the minutes.
Again.
So move, Sheehan.
Second, Noak.
Moved and seconded. Erin, call the roll. Any questions? I'm sorry. Call the roll.
Thank you. Mayor Bennett,
Yes.
Frank Beal, President Brawley,
Yes.
Mayor Darch,
Yes.
Paul Goodrich,
Yes.
Jim Healy, Nina Idamudia,
Yes.
Mayor Noak,
Yes.
President Reinbold,
Yes.
Mayor Rodering, Stefan Schaefer,
I'm going to abstain as I wasn't present.
Carolyn Schofield,
Yes.
Ann Sheehan.
Yes.
Thank you. Matt Walsh
Yes.
and Diane Williams.
I think I was absent also.
Okay.
The motion carries. First item on the agenda is the executive director's report. Erin?
All right. Thank you very much, Mayor Bennett. Just a reminder, as Mayor Bennett mentioned here, that tomorrow the state's disaster declaration will be rescinded, which means that this board and our committees will return to in-person meetings. Our June 14th meeting will be in person. As required by the Illinois Open Meetings Act, a quorum of 12 members will be, it's a very loud truck outside, sorry. A quorum of 12 members will be needed to be physically present in order for all future meetings. Just as a quick note, also related to board meetings, our October 11th meeting, the joint board and MPO meeting, it will be held in the afternoon. So you will get, if you have not already, an updated calendar invite for that. Because the plan of action for regional transit report, we are anticipating improving that in October. Metra's participation is crucial to that, and they have a previously scheduled board meeting that approves their budget. So we do plan to provide lunch and tours of the old post office. So stay tuned for more information. I just wanted to make sure you're aware of that early. It'll be a little bit of a departure from our typical October joint meeting in the morning. So it'll be in the afternoon instead, same day. One of the things that I've been out doing this spring is taking our State of the Region work on the road that's celebrating a worthy cause, our communities and their incredible achievements. Through 7 and counting events in places like Arlington Heights, Aurora, Skokie, Montgomery, we've shined a light on some of the projects and people who make this region a great place to live, work, play, and do business. I want to extend my thanks to our board members, Matt Brawley and Carolyn Schofield, who have welcomed us to our respective counties and communities and let us really share some of those great successes, but also some of the challenges facing our region. But we've really been trying to talk about what opportunities lay ahead and how can we best collaborate with our government partners through this process and as we continue to advance the goals and objectives of 2050 plan. I also wanted to announce to the board that CMAP is supporting the Metropolitan Mayor's Caucus application for the Carbon Pollution Reduction Grant Program. These requirements include a priority climate action plan that will need to be completed by 2024, March of 2024. This will guide the Environmental Protection Agency's $4.6 billion in phase 2 implementation grants, for which CMAP would become eligible to help entities with implementation, but also your communities, your counties, and other agencies across our region will also be eligible for competing for these funds that will be available nationally. Just as many of you know, our 2050 plan sets goals for greenhouse gas emission reduction, but Northeastern Illinois emissions only declined 9% since 2001, which is not nearly enough to meet our goals of net zero emissions by 2050. So through this grant opportunity, CMAP will build upon its greenhouse gas inventories works, will factor in equity implications and develop policy recommendations that leverage existing funding and processes, and we hope ultimately will result in greater collective action that will benefit all of our residents across the region. I also wanted to thank you and our partners for spreading the word about our Future Leaders in Planning program, or FLIP program. We've received over 40 applications from high schoolers who are interested in spending an immersion week with us this summer to learn more about the planning profession. So thanks for sharing that. We are excited about that program and know that many of you have just been such great advocates for the program over the years. So thank you again. We've got a great cohort of students that we've received about 40 applications so far. We're really excited about this work this summer. I also wanted to share that the Illinois International Port District has been awarded $150,000 from the Chicago Communities Trust's Our Great Rivers program. This is thanks in part to our CMAP staff who ushered this successful application forward by identifying and proposing and evaluating possible projects for this grant opportunity. Again, one of the things that we try to do is do technical assistance with communities, is help them with the implementation process. And this is a great example of how we're able to help support them as they pursue additional funding to implement the projects that are put forth in their comprehensive plans. Again, the grant funding for the Port District will go towards a feasibility study on treatment of wetlands and other stormwater improvements to improve water quality in Lake Calumet area, as well as fund 2 years of the Port's soon to launch community action team. So we're excited about that. Wanted to share just some success stories from some recent planning activities with you. And then our plan of action for regional transit, or PART project, the steering committee will convene at CMAP for its 3rd meeting at the end of this month. The project's in full swing. We've been doing public engagement these past couple of weeks. We've been taking our presentations to the Council of Mayors, to our counties, to really focus on a variety of groups in the coming weeks to hear from a diverse array of stakeholders. Again, you'll hear a fuller update on this from Laura later in the agenda. And then lastly, I wanted to mention on your agenda today is that we are asking for some input on potential amendments to the board's bylaws regarding virtual meeting participation and clarification that the board and its committees may use a consent agenda to transact business, to expand the duties in the executive committee and the authorization to approve agenda items from the board agenda if the board is unable to meet, and changing the contract authority of the executive director. So I think we have experienced a little bit of change over the past few meetings. We want to make sure that the operations of the agency continue to move forward. And so that was really our focus on the revisions. We'll have some time to review those and to seek your feedback. We aren't asking for approval today, just simply asking for your feedback in this process. So with that, Mayor Bennett, I'm happy to answer questions, but that concludes my director's report.
Thanks, Aaron. Any questions of Aaron regarding the report? Yes, Ann?
Oh, I just had a question. Can you talk a little bit about, I think it's the climate action plan that you're developing, just how you're going to be working with the various counties and cities to get their feedback and work from plans that might already exist?
Yeah, so one of the things that we've been doing is learning from our peers across the country. And one of the, I think, really successful examples of the work that we already have here is the City of Chicago's Climate Action Plan, which I may not be getting that title right, but also the Metropolitan Mayor's Caucus is regional climate action plan that they had worked on under a grant through the European Union. Again, not going to get the name right. So with the Mayor's Caucus leading this, we're really supporting them and sort of the data and analytics, but our goal is to make sure that all cities, all municipalities are eligible and to build off the existing frameworks of those two resources that we have. So Chicago's Climate Action Plan and thinking about sort of all sorts of solutions that might be incorporated in that. So not just sort of transportation focused, but really that there are nature-based solutions, that there are community-based solutions that we should be focusing on. And then sort of thinking about, again, how the communities that have already committed to climate action plans across the region, we can help sort of elevate and enhance their data and information and understanding as well. Is that?
Yeah, that's, thank you.
Any other questions? Thank you. We'll move on to procurements and contracts. And Aaron, you're going to take that, I guess, right?
I am going to take this one here this morning. So we do have 4 contracts on the agenda here for approval. I'll just go through them briefly here. We've got an intergovernmental agreement for a 3-year term between CMAP and the Cook County Department of Transportation and Highways for the Berwyn Riverside Railroad Grade Crossing Study in the amount of $500,000. Also on your agenda, you'll see there's a contract for a 1-year agreement for AECOM Technical Services for the project management and development of municipal pavement management plans for the LTA program that we have. We also have 5.03, which is multiple contracts for CMAP's ADA project consultant services for a 3-year term with 2 1-year optional renewals in the amount of not to exceed $3,075,000. And then a contract for an 18-month agreement with Streetlight Data for the speed data project, which is processing connected vehicle data, crash characteristics in the not to exceed amount of $375,890. So we're seeking your approval. I'm able to answer any questions here or have staff.
No, I'd like the motion to approve all of those.
There's a motion. Is there a second?
This is
Second, Jean.
Diane, I second.
Moved and seconded for approval of all 4 of those items. Aaron, call the roll.
Thank you. Mayor Bennett,
Aye.
Frank Beal, President Raleigh.
Yes.
Mayor Darch,
Yes.
Paul Goodrich.
Yeah.
Jim Healy. Nina Adamudia,
Yes.
Mayor Noak,
Yes.
President Reinbold,
Yes.
Mayor Rodering, Stefan Schaefer,
Yes.
Carolyn Schofield,
Yes.
Ann Sheehan,
Yes.
Matt Walsh,
Yes.
Diane Williams.
Yes.
And the motion carries. Thank you, Aaron.
Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, under item 6, last month, the executive committee met in closed session to discuss salary considerations going forward. We had a presentation, information given, and came out of executive session, and the executive committee, in fact, recommended a proposal for the board to consider, and that's to approve a 2.5% inflationary cost increase and a 3.5 compensation increase consistent with past years to the executive director's salary, along with continuing funding for leadership and coaching. Now, we can go into executive session, but that is the recommendation of the executive committee, and we can bypass the executive session merely by the board approving, unless they want to go into executive session to discuss the items. It is up to the board. So
This
guess
is no kind of motion to approve.
Second, Reinbold.
moved and seconded. That's on the item regarding compensation. Any questions regarding that? Aaron, call the roll.
Mayor Bennett,
Aye.
Frank Beal, President Raleigh,
Yes.
Mayor Darch,
Yes.
Paul Goodrich,
Yep.
Jim Healy, Nina Adamudia,
Yes.
Mayor Noak,
Yes.
President Reinbold,
Yes.
Mayor Rodering, Stefan Schaefer,
Yes.
Carolyn Schofield,
Yes.
Ann Sheehan,
Yes.
Matt Walsh,
Yes.
Diane Williams.
Yes.
The motion carried. Thank the board. There was a pretty extensive study done on compensation going forward, and I think the motion to approve is a fair increase for employees, and certainly our executive director for the great job she's doing. And you also saved about 10 minutes of time here. So
Well, Mayor
done.
Bennett. Oh, sorry. Mayor Darch.
No, I just had a quick question since we saved time. No, I don't want to waste it, but just back on when we approved the Berwyn Riverside feasibility study for the crossing, if other communities, I don't remember exactly how that came to be, if it was just a decision because it's related to create or what have you, but if other communities are interested in having studies done on rail crossings, what would be your advice, Erin, to them
Yeah, I
because
would
some
say,
can't get started, without that. Sorry.
you know, one of the things we've done over the past couple of years is looked at a new process available to communities across the country. It's called Planning and Environmental Linkages. It's not as substantial as a phase one process, but it helps narrow down alternatives. We've been partnering with Cook County and communities to pilot a couple of these opportunities to see what the successes are or best practices are coming out of these PELs, with the hopes of, you know, really using this as a proof of concept to help our county partners and our municipalities have greater tools and technical resources to advance projects faster. So if there are communities that are interested in talking with us a little bit about this process, again, we don't typically do a lot of engineering with the funds that we receive, which is why the funds are flowing through Cook County for this process. So it does require a different funding source than we have, but we are always happy to talk with communities, bring the county DOTs in to help talk about some of those opportunities to advance some of this work. So please don't hesitate to have them, you know, be in touch with me, and I can get them in touch with the right technical staff that we have here.
Great, thank you.
And if I may, Mayor Bennett, I wanted to just give my sincere thanks to this board. It is a pleasure to serve with each of you. And I know that I've had the opportunity to learn so much from you, both individually and your professional careers, but also really understand the complexities of our region. And it's just a delight for me to continue to work on behalf of the region's communities and help advance the work of the 2050 plan. So I wanted to express my thanks to this board for your support and appreciation.
Thanks, Erin. And we certainly know over the last couple of years, again, since COVID, the tasks that this agency has been asked to be involved in, some by demand, some by volunteering. And I think, you know, you've done an exemplary job moving forward with those additional duties and requests. That's what this agency is all about. And we will move forward in that same spirit. Thanks. Under item 7, which is the committee reports, Mayor Reinbold.
Thank you, Mayor, and good morning, everyone. Included in your packet is a copy of the Coordinating Committee's 2022 annual report. Pursuant to the bylaws, the committee shall annually report its activities to the board. In 2022, we focused on 3 primary areas. The first, broadening regional awareness through information sharing and discussions around the agency's ADA plan work. The second is assisting the decision-making process and CMAP's role in facilitating regional coordination around funding opportunities provided in the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. And the third is evaluating alignment with core values by reviewing the agency's Community Alliance for Regional Equity, also known as the CARE program, which aims to create deeper partnerships between community-based organizations and CMAPs. For 2023, we're off to a great start. This morning, the committee created a space for cross-collaboration through discussions of the agency's strategic direction. Generally, and more specifically, the agency's efforts as they relate to the intersection of housing and transportation and the freight climate. And I'd also like to take this opportunity to thank and acknowledge Stephanie for the great job she's done in supporting the committee in terms of preparation of the agenda, and also the staff that's always presented topics of interest for our discussion and input. So Stephanie, thank you for your hard work and also your support team. That concludes my report. I'd be happy to take any questions or accept any comments.
Thanks, Mayor. Any questions? Seeing no hands, we will move on with the next item on the agenda. That's an item regarding the PART action plan. Laura, you going to take that? Yes.
I am. Thank you, Mayor. Speaking of things we've been asked to do here at CMAP, but this is the work that the General Assembly mandated us to do, but we are excited and happy to be working on this. And the more we get into it, the more complex and interesting it becomes. And so I understand we're going to be sharing a lot of information with all of you today as we start to get to within 4 months of needing to make these recommendations as drafts to all of you. So there's a lot of information I'll cover today. We're happy to share more information with you. We're going to be sharing more information with you in different white papers and other recommendations as we move forward. But really want to give you an update of where we're headed as we start to look towards recommendations this summer. So next slide. As we've talked many times before, just to kind of reorient ourselves today, there's kind of 3 buckets that we're putting the work in as we move through it. How the system we want, the system improvements, how we're going to pay for this, and then how do we implement it, which really hits the different areas that the legislation requires for us to be talking about. So I'm going to talk a lot today about the system we want and a little bit of how to pay for it, and we'll get into implement it as we move forward this summer. So in the system we want section, next slide, we're going to talk a little bit today about where we've been going on improving the bus system, better buses, which again, we know is one of the key modes that really held up during COVID. And we also see a lot of growth in this area that could improve our system, fare integration and affordability, safety and security, system accessibility and regional route. Like I said, there's a lot coming today. We have upcoming conversations still on land use, operational efficiencies, and service frequency. What we're trying to do is really wrap up the system improvements pieces as best we can this month so that we can move to recommendations in June and July. So I'm going to start next slide about the better buses. Again, a lot of information on here, so I just really want to give a flavor of where we're going. We really feel like a lot of the recommendations are going to be centered around how we plan for and fund bus priority infrastructure. How do we improve reliability and reach of the bus system? How we can invest in new staff capacity at DOTs. We really, as we understand in this regional area, it's a multimodal system and they need to be working in conjunction with each other. So we're looking at those types of recommendations. And how do we implement automated enforcement to really allow for reliability and improvement within the bus system throughout the entire region? I also note in each of these slides, we have in the corner a little blue box that talks about how all of these things are interrelated, right? We can't actually silo them. So we really want to acknowledge that a lot of these things actually go into other areas of governance, how we implement these things, how we're going to pay for these. So those are kind of the information in the corner is really showing that we recognize that these really can't be siloed and there's other areas. So like service frequency standards or system revenues really does have impacts in this area of how we do it, as well as these other kind of areas we're talking about. So the next slide is seamless and integrated fares. We're looking at standing up an effective structure that could really implement full fare integration. It's something that this region's been talking about for a long time. And we know it's something that our region wants. And so how do we actually implement that and what does that look like? Defining the goals of that integrated system. So what does that look like for fares and transfers and different fare structures? We need to ensure that we have adequate and sustainable funding for our fares, as well as integrating it with complementary modes. So we really do have a seamless system. And again, this overlaps with governance and other funding support. The next slide is fare levels and affordability. So we need to ensure that fare revenues continue to support our transit operations and as well as maintain fare affordability. So if we talk about raising fares, where do we have subsidies for different vulnerable populations? So those really need to be married together as we move forward. The next slide is safety, security, and cleanliness, something we've talked about here. The recommendation areas that we're moving into are increasing visible staff presence, so things like transit ambassadors or stronger connections with human service providers, strengthening two-way rider communications. We've heard a lot that people want to have ability to be giving information about what's happening and also to be able to get contact with people within the structures that they have. We want to invest in the physical infrastructure that improves the rider experience. We've heard a lot from what's going on in the area of within stations, within the trains, within bus stops. And so we want to make sure that those things are improved as well as we look towards bringing riders back to the system. The next slide is transit system accessibility. We've had some really great conversations with the accessibility community about how to really integrate full ADA accessibility into the full system. It's things like taking the ASAP program and expediting that or doing that with the whole system. And we found a lot of support for moving those things forward. The other piece of it is technological accessibility. And a lot of those things actually marry together too. So we really want to make sure that there's a stronger two-way communication, as well as investments to make sure that people are getting around, feeling comfortable in this in the system and being able to really make their way through all three of the systems. Next slide, we talked about demand responsive services. So dial a ride and being able to move through last mile, right? We've talked a lot about last mile issues in this forum as well. And then ensuring the ADA paratransit can provide effective and financial sustainabilities for regional travelers. So a lot of our recommendations within these areas, we're moving forward. Next slide, talking about regional rail, another topic that we've talked about here at board is how do we move service frequency in this new space. So we're talking about how does Metra change or adapt to the evolving travelers' needs post-COVID. So we really want to look at, are there different policy principles that can support Metra's evolution? And so we're working with them to come up with what are the things that the state could be doing to enable that service in a better way. We also want to look at, targeted revenues to have existing commuter rail assets better meet those needs. So that might take rolling stock, that might take actual capital expenditures. So we're looking at those options as well. So that's a lot on what we've been doing on the system improvements. So again, we're trying to wrap up a lot of these recommendations so that we can move towards how does that impact the funding options? What do we need to look at for funding for these? A lot of the things that we talked about actually do require some sort of funding in order to enable them to happen, as well as state support for policy and legislation. So I'm going to move into the funding option. So then we take all those system improvements, we put it in a bucket, and we say, how are we going to not only fund the operations that we have, but these improvements to the system? So kind of like any other analysis that we would do on our road system, we look at what are all the alternatives, what are all of the options on the table, and then start doing analysis on how much revenue they're bringing in, how does that have impacts, what's the feasibility of implementation. So where do we start? Well, we start with where we're getting funding for things currently. So I'm going to kind of break down each of these points, but what we wanted to really show here in these bars is that essentially the system right now is funded by fares, which you see at the top, right? So system generated revenues. Then we have a little bar of other, which is a little information or different funding sources, and I can go through those. And then basically the two bars at the bottom are sales tax. So we're going to talk about all those different options. And I know that we talked a little bit about that in our last board meeting. So in this next slide, we're just going to talk about the fare component for a second. How do we actually improve fares and bring ridership back so those fares, our revenues continue to increase? So next slide. So taking that little the green bars and putting that to the side for a second. So what does that mean, right? What are the system improvements that are going to bring people back? How are we going to raise fares, which we need to do in our system that, keep up with inflation? How do we actually look at low income fare subsidies so that those people who are impacted by the increase in fares still have accessibility to the transit system? And we know that that's important, and we've talked a lot about the equity of the system as we've gone through this. And then the last component really is the fare box recovery ratio, which we've been talking a lot about here, and we've been supportive of changing it. We have one of the highest in the country, but it is a performance metric. So if we're going to reduce or remove the fare box recovery ratio, we want to make sure that we still have performance metrics for our transit system. So we are investigating a lot of that information. The next component piece that we're looking at is that little sliver of other. Oh, yeah, go ahead to the next slide. Is that little sliver of other, right? So that other, it could be it is currently right now the city of Chicago's real estate transfer tax. It's also some public support that we get through state funding. And so we're looking at that component, but we want this to be sustainable revenues if we're going to be looking at what other things we could put into the system. So next slide. So you kind of take that bar and put it to the right. So what we're talking about here is state contributions for reduced fares, increasing state support for paratransit. Are there other new sustainable revenues we could be looking at? Are there other road sources? Are there other taxes on payroll, utility? What would those things bring in? And again, additional federal support for our paratransit. So when I start saying road revenues, people go, what do you mean? And so next slide is talking about what we're looking at. And so when we talk about road system revenues, what we're exploring, and again, exploring at this point, are the different menu options. And a lot of these we've talked about already in 2050, right? These are things that CMAP has been supportive of, things like VMT, tolling, cordon pricing, as a way to look at improving our transportation system. So we're looking at this right now of how would you adjust or increase some of these options, and how would that be used for the transit system? So we're really doing some analysis in all of these areas to see what that might look like, and getting feedback from people about how they feel about these different options. So that is something that we are going to continue to do analysis and bring what we find back to this group. Next slide is that last large piece of how we fund our transit system, and that is the sales tax. So right now, and the state match to that sales tax, we are going to look at how would we propose changes to this system, or any at all, that would deliver benefits for the transit system. So take that blue bar and move it to the right, and let's talk about that. So what does that look like to modernize the statewide sales tax base? And one of the things that we've looked at as we're starting to have these conversations is that we see this, right, sales taxes on goods, and we're seeing that goods are actually declining. So if we're talking about a sustainable revenue source, is that something we want to continue to increase? Or do we look towards doing something else, which might be moving the sales tax or the tax base to services, which is actually increasing in our area? So we're exploring both of those options to see what happens within our region and within our system in order to fund the transit system. Next slide. So when we start talking about this, again, this is something that's been used to fund our transit system for a long time. We know that the composite sales tax rate on general merchandise is 9 to 11% in Cook County and 7 to 8.75% in the Collier counties. So increasing that even by 0.25% could produce significant revenues for this funding gap. However, we also recognize that the sales tax rate in Illinois is higher than many within the country. And so with that in mind, next slide, again, one of the things that we're investigating is you could adjust the existing sales tax rate, or you could broaden the sales tax onto new services, or you could do a hybrid scenario between both of them. So these are things that we're investigating, and we want to bring back our research to you, so as we move forward to recommendations. And the last component piece of all of the work that we're doing is the governance component, and that's the how to implement it. So in this space, we've been working with the steering committee to hear all of the different voices, get information back about how people feel about the system here, and then provide, again, with our third party ENO Center for Transportation, some models of different governance structures and how that would impact our system here. So that's kind of the stage that we're in now, is looking at what are the different models, what have been some of the different reports and information people have provided, again, over the years here in Northeast Illinois, and then be able to bring some of those suggestions to the board further this summer. So again, last slide is just the timeline. Again, there's so much information we've been trying to go through. We really like to finalize these system improvement components here in May, bring to you a discussion of both what we've found on the funding and governance analysis. July and August, meet with the region individually. Really want to have a lot of one-on-one meetings to really dive into some of these recommendations, get people's input. Then in September, we will bring the draft plan to the board with hopeful approval in October. And then in December, we deliver it to the governor and legislative sponsors. So again, it's very fast and we're moving through a lot of materials, but want to make sure that we share these with you and get any input. And I'm happy to take any questions or comments. And again, happy to provide more information if requested.
Questions?
Jerry,
Yes.
yes. Karen. So first, could we have a copy of the this presentation? A lot of good information in there. Second, we're hearing from a lot of mayors. John John Nook made some good points the other day on a call we were on. That one area, there's a tremendous amount of, I'd say, angst about the study in terms of the effect it will have on, or new recommendations on existing services. And one component that maybe, I don't know how you squeeze it in here, but I think it'll be important ultimately when this comes back to us, is looking at the impact of any of the recommendations on what currently exists. So I'm hearing this from, suburban mayors, as I've mentioned many times, the rail Metra is hugely important to so many of our communities. And I would just say in my quick look at what was on the chart, the recommendation about the state policy or recommendation that might come out on local land use vis-a-vis density around a station. If the goal there is to maximize use of the system, I would just suggest that perhaps a way to look at that is the ridership on whatever that particular mode is versus trying to solve the problem with one method when there may not be an issue there. Example, where you've got a less dense area out in our further out suburbs, and yet we are maximizing ridership and it has returned. The issue of the density near the station may not be the right thing to look at, as opposed to, is that serving the area that it's in? Is my 700 person parking lot full every day? And, you're serving thousands of riders who can walk or drive in from a bigger region to the station. Is the maximized use of the system the important goal versus saying we need to change the land use policy in order to solve a problem that maybe doesn't exist? So just that kind of comment on that piece. But I do think this impact of whatever recommendations, and I know this is so condensed, it's hard to do this, but it is going to be absolutely critical to understanding what we're recommending. Thanks.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
John Noak, to go along with that, any discussion about changing governance must also include the obstacles and hurdles to changing governance and the delays, and they will be significant. Anytime there's been a consolidation or change in governance, there have always been problems for the most part, especially in agencies of this scale and magnitude. And the reality is we have a financial cliff that we're facing in a much sooner time frame. And the two, while you say they have to be together, they don't necessarily also have to be together. The issues of the fiscal cliff and financing can be separated from the issues of governance. And in large part, this study seems to be geared toward that a change of governance is a necessity. It is not, we should not rule out the possibility that a change of governance, we can tell the legislature that a change of governance at this time is not necessary. That doesn't seem to even be on the table, but yet it is an option that can be pursued. And change of governance has its own issues that create all kinds of other types of problems, but those have to be also pointed out in any discussion as well. And so we need to be careful about this because we have a financial cliff that is looming. And if we want to find full regional support for financial solutions, marrying this with a governance change that may not be, palatable to a large section of the region may cause a bigger problem on the bigger, more pending issue, which is the financial cliff.
Yeah, I think the response regarding certainly the area of governance, Laura, I have not heard anything major talking about that other than decision-making. Again, this is a report that's going to the state of Illinois, which, for the most part, I look at it as being potentially, the financial component of the study and how it's going to be funded, whether it's the state or recommendations for regional policy regarding fares and or sales tax, et cetera, et cetera. The governance thing, Laura, before I continue to talk, what ideas or suggestions are they coming up with governance?
Well, yeah, so I will say, like any good research and analysis, right, is we want to, again, look at all the options that are on the table. So you're right, like one of the options is no change at all. And you go through every kind of what are the different elements all the way to we have a complete change. And so what we want to do is be able to look at that and do some analysis of what does that mean for our region? What is the policy part of that? What is the implementation part of that? And so right now, that's why we didn't spend too much time on it today, as we're really trying to create what that scale looks like, and then what does the impact of the system look like. And so that's what we want to bring to you guys at the next meeting, is what is that, the pros and cons of all of those, so that we can have that discussion. So I do think it is right now, like, we're not trying to take anything off of the table, but it goes from no change to full change. So we're really exploring, what does that look like? And how has that impacted or worked in other regions as well? So trying to bring all that analysis to you guys by next month.
Well, as long as that the actual no change is actually something that's on there, and the implications of what change means to finding consensus on funding for the issues that we have for financially, I did think it's important that all of those things are actually on the table and that various options are pursued.
Yeah, and I appreciate that. And I think it's one of the things, again, that the General Assembly asked us to look at all of these components. And what we're trying to do is make sure that we respond to all of their requests, and then bring that information to you guys as well.
I understand that, but again, up till now, up to this point, the option of telling the General Assembly that no change is probably, it could potentially be the preferable choice, given the financial cliff and the reality that we need to face that much sooner. It is the first time we've really heard that.
Yeah, and I would say again, because that conversation, I at least I had not heard floated to a priority of the report, or the most item to be considered. Politically, certainly two things. This region, certainly with this organization, has always been a collaborative about the city, the suburbs, and the counties. I don't see that changing. I don't also see a recommendation that would put one party, greater than the other. That model, certainly of our agency, and certainly any governance going forward, would also replicate or at least have a similar action policy that everybody has a voice. And the second thing is the General Assembly. Again, this is a report to the General Assembly, and whatever recommendations, whether we like it or not, it'll be politicized, certainly in the area of governance, as to how they see it going forward, and that voice down the road. After the recommendation, and talking to members of the General Assembly, whatever the certain recommendations are going to be, or what they may be leaning towards, again becomes a somewhat political decision. And again, I would certainly be first in line to say, look, at this region has through this agency has done a very good job on the governance, at least our actions. Representing an equal voice for all, for everybody within this region, sub-regions, et cetera, et cetera. So that always, the bomb is always thrown in here at some studies that have always been done about something being, crazy, controversial. But I think we all realize that the whole purpose of this point is the reliability and the survivability of transit within this region. And we are, John, yes, we're reaching a fiscal cliff, and some serious decisions are going to have to be made as to maintaining an existing system, improving it, or in addition to that is going to involve revenue. So, and I think all partners will have a voice in, and eventually whatever that recommendation comes or suggestion comes, even from the General Assembly, that it will still come back to our region as to approve or not approve. And I've heard nothing about zoning. This agency has never been involved in the zoning of any particular city, county. So that is a broad term, I think, being used out there, that this agency has never got involved in zoning, nor do I think the General Assembly would take away the power of home rule or non-home rule, and the ability to zone in and around whatever areas that transit are considered. So that's just my take so far, and I'm looking forward to the continuation of the information and suggestions that will be provided in that report, come next month and finally in September. Other questions?
I just had a quick question as it relates to system improvements and service reliability. I know, locally here in Chicago, workforce development is really an issue. And I'm wondering if it's being seen, outside the city, if that's something that we're thinking about, like, obviously they've had, the CTA in particular has had issues hiring post-COVID. And I just wonder how, if this is like a long-term thing that people are thinking about, or if there's just, I'm curious on your thoughts on that or what you're hearing from others.
Yeah, I will say that as we've talked to each of the service boards and we talk about, I mean, I think as we've gone through this process, there's really no one that wants to look at cutting. We really want to look at expansion, right? The interests from the communities are that they would like more accessibility. In order to do that, to even get back to the service that we had 3 years ago, workforce is definitely an issue. And I think all three of the service boards have been experiencing that. And we've had some conversations with them about how we could help that. Again, because this conversation we're having is to give this to the General Assembly in January. This is something they're really working on now. So as we work with them, there's been significant efforts by all three of the service boards to try to recruit and retain different staff. And so I know that PACE has done a lot of, they had a record number of people that they just hired recently. And I think all three of the service boards, it's a conversation we've been having with them is how do they not only recruit, but then retain a lot of the workforce to meet our goals of service reliability and frequency.
Great, thanks.
Any other questions?
If I could just add, it's also the other side of the coin, right? One of the reasons why we have the Retail Merchants Association and our county economic development partners at the table for this conversation is that we know that there are businesses in manufacturing and transportation logistics across the region that currently are also having workforce challenges, right? And they would like to draw people out from some areas of the Chicago region or the city of Chicago out to good paying jobs that are available in the rest of the region. And because housing doesn't facilitate that right now, housing choices are, limited. We know we're all stretched for where's that middle income housing, that can transit help be refreshed, be reformed to help again meet those needs as well. So sorry, Matt, I saw you unmuted. I want to Matt Walsh.
Yeah, just one last comment. This is Matt Walsh. All this is wonderful, but we all have to keep in mind the safety component. Obviously, if people don't feel like public transportation is safe, they're not going to ride it. So that should always be foremost and front and center. That's it.
Yeah.
Other questions? I will move on to part 2 of this item, and that's regarding the proposed draft updates to the board. As you all know, certainly since COVID and the constraints that have been put on us trying to meet, and the restrictions that we have under state law of creating the organization. And we needed to take a look at some things for us to be able to function going forward, certainly because we're also going into live meetings again. So Amy, you've got an update on that or a recommendation?
Thank you. We went through the bylaws of the board and we really looked at where we had issues or challenges over the last couple of years. Sometimes there was a challenge in pulling a quorum. You all have jobs and you work for boards and commissions and other places, and it is challenging to make sure we get everyone together. And of course, that we have an extra supermajority, I'll call it, required for our attendance in person. And so we just wanted to look at different options. I went to the attorney and I talked to him about some of these challenges and how we might be able to continue the operations of the agency if from time to time we were not able to bring together a full quorum of the board to transact the business of the agency. And so we talked through various options and he kind of presented some solutions that the board could consider.
I think with that, Amy, do you want to just walk through the memo briefly here? I know that we've sent a redlined version to the board members with their agenda packet.
Yes, happy to.
Great.
So in Article 3, you'll see that upon recommendation of legal counsel, it provides further clarification on virtual meeting participation. This is really just a cleanup language. We previously had virtual participation, but some of the language around it has adjusted a little bit. So he wants to tie it back to any future changes. So when you read that, it's not actually changing the result, it's tying it back to any future changes the state might make and making it clear that CMAP could follow any amendments that could occur in the future as provided by the state. The next item provides clarification that the board and its committees may use a consent agenda to transact business. We actually do this already by taking 4 or 5 items, and it's not exactly called out in the bylaws. It's not 100% required to be said that way, but he recommended it was a good way to, be clear with the public that it is an authority the board has to take multiple items, related items together. And so this you don't have to use, it just provides you with clearer direction that you may if you wish to. Article 4. Powers of the executive committee. This really relates to how to transact business in the absence of a board meeting and provides consideration to expand the duties of the executive committee to conduct on behalf of the board. So if you look at the language, it basically indicates that if the board is unable to meet for 15 days and doesn't have another meeting for 15 days, or I think it's 14 actually, sorry, taking into consideration February, that the executive committee could take action on behalf of the board. And then, as you may remember, in our last update, we did indicate that any action of the executive committee is reported to the board at its next meeting. So that's a little, I'll call it wiggle room. If we had a situation where full in-person quorum was not able to be achieved, the executive committee could act on behalf of the board and then report its its decision to the board. I'll pause there.
Yeah, I did have a question on that. I'm not the attorney. It reads as though paragraph 2 grants that authority, and paragraph 3 sort of says if you can't have a meeting, they can do this stuff. As long as it's clear, because it's very broad, that they're doing it in absence of a full board meeting, in a sort of an emergency situation, I'd be more comfortable. But otherwise, it appears to be written very broadly that the executive committee can basically do anything.
I can work with the attorney if that's a concern of the board to try to make that clearer. Our intent really was, we recognize in the summertime you guys don't meet, sometimes in the month of December you don't meet, and then also you have months where maybe you intended to, but for one reason or another, many of our members are out of town or unable to attend in person. So if that's the direction, I'm happy to work with the attorney to make that clearer.
Does the executive committee need to have a certain quorum threshold and meet in person, or?
Correct. They would have the same requirements.
And it's a public meeting that would be posted, or?
It is a public meeting, yes.
Okay.
Yeah, I thought the language was clear in indicating that if the board could not meet, or if the board cannot meet, the executive committee would then take up items. And I think primarily, as we've seen in the past, that's usually the financial considerations of contracts and or what would be normal board approval to handle those kind of items.
And is it clear on that it's those items really that we're talking about, not anything else?
Again, I can re-go through the language with the attorney. The intent is that we would, items that were intended for, let's say the April board meeting, we weren't able to, that those April board meeting items could be acted on if no other meeting were scheduled for the board to meet and take action. But if you don't feel like that's 100% clear, happy to work with him on making it so.
Yeah,
I think the scope is too broad. I think that we need to be clear about what we intend to them to let the executive committee do. I mean, we can't let the executive committee make all decisions.
Yeah, and correct, Mayor Noak. And so, one of the things, it does list out, agreements with local units of governments, transportation agencies, et cetera, to implement, contracts related to the work that we have, purchases, enacting the Local Government Prompt Payment Act, purchase orders, those sorts of things, supplies for work. So we'll take another look at it to make sure it's clear and or follow up with some additional details, but I think we did try to be as clear as possible. I think one of the other things too that it says, Amy, somewhere, Under no circumstances will the executive committee have the authority to approve the long-range plan. I think we wanted to uphold and respect the creation of this agency and the policy role that this agency plays collectively. So we wanted to clearly delineate that it's the operations of the agency and our day-to-day business and contracts versus these broad policy objectives that we have. So, which is one of the reasons why we included that language.
Yeah, I
Oh,
thought
yeah.
that
Take a look
it
at-
was all, it's basically administrative things that go on a daily basis with the agency, and that certainly, nor would I think staff ever recommend that the executive committee be put in a position on major policy decisions and or recommendations. Certainly for all the years we've never done that, nor would we, and nor would the executive committee feel comfortable, I would think, ever just making those kind of decisions on major policy issues. But again, it's in the bylaws, I understand, and we shall tweak that if we need to. But I thought we used the word administrative or daily operational things that the executive committee would be asked to be involved in.
I agree with the sentiment, and so I would definitely take a look at rewriting this. That third, number 3 down there says, in cases when the board won't meet, the executive committee may exercise any and all powers of the board. This is very broadly written at this point. So you need to rein that in. This conversation entails.
And that was not the intent when we discussed it. So, and I'm on the executive committee, and I think that the executive committee should have broader powers, but I agree that needs to be brought in.
Yeah, I agree as well. And I've seen in other, in one COG that I'm involved in, there's an action annually by the board to allow the executive committee to act, but like over the summer when the board isn't meeting. So it's specifically done on a routine basis as opposed to being so specified in the bylaws. But I'm good with a bylaw change, but I definitely think the language of that 3 has to get worked into 2. So it's very clear that the executive committee is only exercising those powers in the absence of allowing the board to meet. So anyway, being redundant of what's been said here, but a suggestion.
Not to ask a super random question, but what is the approval threshold for our bylaws amendment?
Meaning how many people need to approve it?
Yeah,
It would be the majority of a quorum, and your quorum is high, so it's.
got it. So just a majority, not like a super or something.
No.
Okay, that's doable.
But I'll, again, repeat this conversation. When the General Assembly formed the Planning Act and created this supermajority quorum, I thought was more political than anything else. I don't know why, but we do need to look downstate at some point in time about the supermajority quorum. That puts an incredible amount of pressure on this agency to have almost a full quorum or close to it to meet, and that's really been the biggest obstacle that we've had to face with the super quorum requirement. So whether we ever get that passed, I don't know, but that's if we didn't have that, we wouldn't have had the problem certainly over the last 2 years, and having now to come up with decisions on whether the executive committee can act in advance of a full board meeting, and we've had a couple of those take place already. So I can't let our board members know enough about going forward. Now we must meet in live form, and we must have a supermajority for a quorum. So your obligation to this agency and going forward and meeting is going to be critical. And as I've indicated to Amy regarding whether that is a burden too much for members going forward, that they need to let the agency know that they may not be able to meet those the compliance of attendance that is so critical. And we will certainly find out. We're only going to meet next month in June. We'll be off July, August, and I'm back in September. So again, next meeting will be a in-person session. Amy, anything else? I'm sorry.
Jerry, I would just, look, I'm sorry, withdrawn.
Mayor, I'm sorry.
Oh, I thought someone else was speaking and I didn't want to step on I just wanted to say that the consent agenda idea makes a lot of sense. It makes the meetings a lot more efficient. And any member that wants to discuss an item and pull it off the consent agenda always has that option.
That's correct.
So.
Amy, I'm sorry, is that it?
The only thing I was going to add is we'll send out abbreviated language to you. If after you read it, there's still some additional concerns and you have a chance to call me before the meeting, I can try to pull together some additional options with the attorney, but we'll try to make sure that we give you language that is both clear and represents the comments that you provided today.
Thank you. All right, moving on to legislative update. John, you here? John?
Yep,
John Carpenter?
yep. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Well, the General Assembly is now heading into the home stretch of the legislative session. The scheduled adjournment date is 2 weeks away, well, almost 2 weeks away, Friday the 19th. This week, Thursday and Friday, are deadlines for House and Senate to have to act on third reading on substantive bills from the opposite chamber. The primary outstanding item facing the General Assembly right now is the development of the fiscal year 24 budget. Negotiations are taking place, even as recent reporting indicated a significant drop in state revenues for April 23. The Commission on Government Accountability, Forecasting and Accountability reported that significant drop. But while the drop in comparison to April 2022 was expected, the extent of the decline was larger than anticipated. But despite this news, the Commission has not made a downward adjustment in the fiscal 24 budget outlook. CMAP staff are reviewing the report now and revising our analysis of the governor's 2024 budget where appropriate. Nevertheless, we continue to have productive conversations with leadership, the budgeteers, and bill sponsors on Senate Bill 1429 and House Bill 4027. Those are the identical bills which would fund the non-transportation work that CMAP does. The conversations are going more complex as the end of session nears, but we continue to emphasize that these appropriations bills are not an investment in CMAP necessarily, but an investment in the counties, the 7 counties and 284 municipalities we serve. On the federal side, we're preparing to reconvene our IIJA working group later next month to revisit our priority project list. And we are continually tracking new federal funding opportunities available under IIJA. Most recently, the Protect NOFO was released, which provides funding to improve the resilience of our transportation system. That concludes my report. Happy to answer any questions.
Yeah, thanks, John. I've been kind of working with legislative staff regarding funding, certainly from day one of this agency not being properly funded as mandated though by state law that we exist. I spoke briefly to the governor about CMAP's proposal on funding, permanent funding for non-transportation planning. I've also spoken to Kelly Burke, who's a budgeteer. Representative Burke chairs the appropriations or finance committee, but also is one of the budgeteers. And also, again, asked that they begin the process, whether for certainly the monies we're asking for, if it can't meet that at least goal, at least begin that process by allocating permanently going forward some funding for the agency. I think they all are aware of the work that this agency has done, and as indicated in our reports earlier, certain mandates that still come out of Springfield requiring us as an agency to do certain planning. If you get a chance over the next couple of weeks, whether you know somebody, leadership in both House and or Senate, or the governor for that much, to remind them that this agency was never funded from day one, and we have done what we have tried to do, whether it's through grants and or certainly support from membership fees to continue to exist as an agency. But I think it's truly remarkable and unfair that you create an agency by state law and not fund it. But that's notoriety of the General Assembly over the years also. So again, if you know somebody.
Right, we'll provide you with talking points on the legislation. So I think that there's we have a good document which explains and outlines why the need is there and what we're asking for.
And John, as you know, they get down to the last days of putting that budget together, and that's when the decisions are made. And again, I ask if you know somebody in budget leadership and or the governor's office to remind them, please, let's start not just the conversation, but the actual allocations of funds for this agency. And good luck and thank you guys for the work this year. Has probably been the most we've ever stepped up to the plate in trying to get funding for the agency.
well, we're working hard at it. I'm heading to the Capitol right after this meeting.
Good.
Thank you.
Thank you. Under other business.
Nothing on my end, Mayor Bennett.
Okay, public comment?
I'll just note that last month's written comments have been included for reference as item 10.01. We have not received anything in advance, but I do see Garland Armstrong has his hand up.
Go ahead, Garland.
How you doing, Mayor Bennett and everybody? It's Garland Armstrong, formerly of Des Plaines, now living in Des Moines, and I just want to give kudos for what the report on for the ADA accessibility, and I think you need to be included in there is a sign language interpreter. So, like, whenever you have a sign language interpreter who wants to come to it, always have it in there. That's part of the accessibility. And also for those who cannot speak English, also have interpreters from different areas, because that's going to be the part of the cultural part helping out for the ADA. So just want to give you a suggestion on that. And also too, I just want to give you the heads up. Next month, me and my wife will be coming back to the Chicagoland area. It'll be 2 years after we left the Chicagoland area. So we'll be looking forward to seeing you again. It'll be so emotional. And I just want to give you an update. My wife's condition is not so good at all. So I just want y'all to pray for her. And when she comes back, you'll see what the difference is in her. She's not herself at all. So it's stressful on me here. So I just want y'all to pray for her. But we'll be looking forward to coming back next month. It'll be on June 13th until we leave on June 22nd. So it'll be so emotional to see everybody, current ones and new members there. So just to remind you, give you a heads up on that. So I'll be glad if anybody have any questions or comments. I'm available right now.
Bless you, Garland, and certainly to your wife also. And we look forward, if you're going to come to a meeting, to seeing you in person. So thank you.
Thanks.
All right. Again, our next meeting is in person, CMAP, 9:30. We will see everybody there. And with that in mind, there's no executive committee meeting after this, so you get a break from that. And with that in mind, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
Motion adjourned, Noak.
Second.
Reinbold.
Moved and seconded. Aaron, call roll.
Mayor Bennett,
Yes.
Frank Beal, President Brawley,
Yes.
Mayor Darch,
Yes.
Paul Goodrich, Jim Healy, Nina Adamudia,
Yes.
Mayor Noak,
Yes.
President Reinbold,
Yes.
Mayor Rodering, Stephen Schaefer,
Yes.
Joan Schofield,
Yes.
Ann Sheehan,
Yes.
Matt Walsh,
Yes.
Diane Williams.
Yes.
Motion carries. Enjoy the beautiful day, and we'll see you next month. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Have a good one. Thank you.
Thanks. Bye-bye.